Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only Joy here, and once again I am back for the likes of the Maxi Toys videos. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for some more of Let's Play of Super Princess Peach for the Nintendo DS. So, last time, we somehow managed able to fully complete everything in terms of the forms of World 6, in the forms of Glam Glacier, for not only trying to able to actually obtain some more puzzle pieces, in addition to music scores. In addition to that, all thanks to the forms of those extra stages, which we've once again did manage to went into, relatively speaking though, we did somehow manage able to obtain, specifically, more unlockable levels for some minigames for Toad's Jump, Toad Trot, and Toad Shot. And as a result, we did somehow manage able to unlock level 8 with those minigames. So as a result, yeah, again, we'll save those minigames for later. In addition to that, we've once again have a rematch against with the forms of Blizzardrus, as the actual boss suggests, so to able to try to unlock some even more extra stages, but this time around though we did manage to able to unlock the extra stages in Area 7, which, speaking of Area 7, is that today for this video is that we are about to be heading back into World 7 for the final time in Giddy Sky to do the usual routine as before. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact that again, once we're able to make our way to the extra stages though, rather than just trying to able to actually obtain some even more puzzle pieces, so instead, you're able to actually guarantee to get yourselves to the next level for the sake of the forms of 3 minigames. But this time around though, I get the feeling about the fact that we might be able to actually unlock level 9 for the sake of the forms of those 3 minigames. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact that as soon as we're able to make our way to the final world in the game again, so hopefully though we won't be able to have too many troubles with this point. So either way, so yeah, a few things I want to talk about this is though, and that's what appears to be for the fact that, well, today's date of course is the 2nd of June today, in some cases in 2025 today. Well, relatively speaking for this point guys, is that only 3 more days to go until not only does the Nintendo Switch 2 is releasing, but in addition to Mario Kart World as well. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact that yes, the moment has finally become, for the sake of the forms that we now onto the Nintendo Switch 2 week. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact that, like I said before, only 3 more days to go now, or technically 72 hours left until the actual thing launches. So as a result, yeah, I'm still pretty much excited for it, especially considering about the fact that I can't even believe it's been so quick when it comes to likely for certain days to able to actually become like finished and over during the forms within the past few days or something like that. I mean, mind you, it has been about 3 days ago since I actually have last played this game for sure, because relatively speaking, I was about the fact that what I've also realized is that Lola Bunny, that she's almost finishing up Pony Kart DS, which as a matter of fact, that she's now moving on into the final 3 modes to able to show off, which appears to be in battle mode and in addition to versus race and time trials every once in a while. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact that we're able to stay tuned for that. So relatively speaking, also is about the fact that there are some a couple of updates I would like to point things out for you guys. Well, in terms of the forms of news, discussions, alike, so relatively speaking though, is about the fact that what I've realized is that apparently though, Cap King 74, he's actually going to be going back on doing the forms of that familiar optional Let's Plays territory, which I know for a fact that so far he actually did done, well, let's just say 4 of those Let's Plays when it comes to optional Let's Plays so far. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact that he did done Super Mario Maker 1 for the Wii U, and in addition to Super Smash Bros. For the Wii U, and on top of all that stuff though, with the forms of Jump Up, Jump Stars, Victory vs. Plus for PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, or PlayStation Vita. I mean, mind you, it's been a very long time since I actually have last known about the forms of J-Star Victory vs. Plus, because we used to have that game on the PlayStation 3, but we no longer have it, mainly because it's been, you know, ages since we've last played that game. Although, I will admit though right away, I don't usually enjoy that game as much compared to the forms of how it does it on the majority of the Dragon Ball Z games, because, well, relatively speaking, I was about the fact I'm still really hoping that Dragon Ball Sparking Zero will eventually make it into the forms of Nintendo Switch 2, but then again, we'll have to wait and see what happens, especially considering for the fact that we've only got about 4 more days to go until the Summer Game Fest is also going to be starting as well. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact that there are, you know, 2 events we're really looking forward to, and we still have no idea if Nintendo decides to actually decide to do. The next Nintendo Direct focuses on Nintendo Switch 2, but we shall wait and see what happens, especially considering for the fact that this is the beginning of the forms of June already, for the sake of the forms of 2025 as a matter of fact. So because of that, now, I've also heard about the fact that Sonic did tell me about this is about the fact that back in June Evolves in 2015, which is roughly like, you know, a decade ago, there was that particular game called Sonic Runners, which, relatively speaking, I was about the fact that that game was used to be released during Evolves in 2015 all the way up to 2016, when I'm like, okay, I'm not exactly sure what that's about exactly, but I do know for the fact that Sonic did tell me about the fact that that was roughly during a time where during Evolves have been by the end of June in 2015, when he did manage to actually got himself Sonic Runners to begin with back then, but then later on though in 2016, as you know, that with the forms of Sonic Runners didn't seem to last for a very long time. It only lasted for about a year, mainly because of poor sales and in addition to a lot of emphasis on microtransactions from what I've heard. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact that it's gone pretty crazy to believe about the fact that with the original Sonic Runners game on the smartphone games, that that game was going to be almost a decade old, which, as a matter of fact, that could be also applied to the forms of Sonic Dash 2, Sonic Boom, but that's not going to be until specifically at some point in September. So because of that, yeah, we'll try to actually discuss more about it once we're able to make our way to September for this year. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact that there's also another thing else I'd like to explain. Back into what we're saying about the forms of some optional Let's Plays for Cap King 34 or Stuart in general, that currently right now, when it comes to likely for its 4th optional Let's Play he's going to be tackling through, that's what appears to be a fan-made game, which appears to be Super Mario Mon, which is pretty obvious about the fact that it's like a fan-made game, in likely for a combination of both Pokemon and the Super Mario franchise, all in one particular ROM hack, which, as far as I'm aware, is basically based off from the Game Boy Advance installments for Pokemon games like, you know, Pokemon Ruby, Pokemon Sapphire, and most popular one out of them all, though, is Pokemon Emerald, which, despite the fact that the actual price tag for that game nowadays is pretty expensive whenever you're trying to go after, you know, the genuine copy and all that stuff, especially considering for the fact that you have to, like, well, you get the idea for this point. So anyway, it is also worth noting for too is about the fact that unfortunately though, we have some bad news to tell you guys about something, and that's what appears to be for the fact that I did manage to find out ever since in Journey Evolves on Friday, which I suppose I forgot to mention about this, didn't I? Basically what this was though, is about the fact that we actually got ourselves a notification did pop up, not only for the likes of Sonic the Hedgehog CD, for mobile phones, but in addition to Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 2. And what this means though is about the fact that for the majority of, let's just say, the Sega Forever lineup of games for phones essentially, did say the actual message saying end of service, which means about the fact that the actual support for those games in particular made by the forms of Sega Forever lineup, and as a matter of fact, it did stated this: end of service support for this game will be discontinued, but you can continue playing offline if you would like to learn about more great Sega games to play. Please click the link below. So this means about the fact that I can assure you, I get the horrible feeling about the fact it's going to be one of those you know, stupid delisting stuff again for Sega's department, which I know for a fact that because, well, it's hard for me to explain because it's been a very long while since we've mentioned about this particular subject. Ever since in June Evolves last year, all thanks to the forms of the Xbox Live Marketplace for the Xbox 360 shut down since, you know, almost a year ago, which, as a matter of fact, because, relatively speaking, I was about the fact I get the horrible feeling that if you guys ever do miss out on the forms of a remastered version of Sonic CD back in 2011, and no matter what though, I could imagine about the fact that if that particular version gets delisted for the sake of the mobile phone versions of the game, no matter what though, is about the fact that you are basically now stuck with the forms of Sonic Origins compilation, which, don't get me wrong though, is about the fact that I totally understand why for its business department, but it's just that, well, again, if you really want able to experience the actual challenge with widescreen support, with live system, well, I'm afraid to tell you for the fact that, well, it's a bit too early to say this right about now, just because no matter what though, is about the fact that we still have no idea of what's gonna happen for the sake of the forms of the Sega Forever lineup for several mobile games and stuff like that. So, and also, what I found was a bit odd though, is that for whatever reason, is that Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1 never gets that particular notification because for that game, usually because of how the fact that back in 2009 or sometime in 2010, that when the actual the Project Needle Mouse was first announced back in Journey Falls event 2009, that they were originally able to try to make the game exclusively onto mobile phones and decided able to call it like a tentatively titled Sonic the Portable, which generally though later on it eventually became Sonic the Hedgehog 4 as in episodic releases for the sake of the forms of episode 1 anyway. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that it's very odd that, you know, episode 1 never gets the actual end of service notification. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that despite the fact it's been quite some time since we've last played Sonic the Hedgehog 4, either on episode 1 or episode 2, since in Journey Forms within last year, whenever we did manage to did done the redo let's play of that game, or those combination of games with the forms of 3 episodes all in all. So yeah, you get the idea what I was expecting for that point. So anyway though, it is also worth knowing for too is about the fact that there's going to be yet another event is going to take place during the forms within this month, which appears to be in between both 9th of June all the way up to the 13th of June. So that's going to be roughly about next week or so. That event in questioning was WWDC 25, which means it's all Apple products. So as a result, yeah, we'll discuss more about that. Or potentially, speaking of actually, is about the fact that it's probably best if we let Maxi were able to mention more about it if he goes back on playing through Paper Mario by presumably for next week or something like that, if it all really depending on the forms of how the fact that he's going to be up for it. So either way though, because chances are though that, you know, he's now onto the final stretch of the forms of the entire completionist run in terms of the forms of the original Paper Mario that is. So anyway though, and it's also reassuring about this too, is about the fact that, did you guys know that 20th Century Fox has officially became 90 this year, which as a result, yeah, happy 90th anniversary of the 20th Century Fox ever since in 1935 all the way up to 2025. So by that time until the next 10 years to come, it will eventually becomes 100 years old. So as a result, despite the fact that the 20th Century Fox did somehow got killed, all thanks to the forms of, you know, the mouse himself, which obviously you get the idea for this point, Mickey Mouse, or in some cases the Disney as a company itself, just because the actual brand is now changed into, let's just say 20th Century Animation or something like that. I might be wrong. I mean, relatively speaking, that was about the fact it has been quite some time since we've last mentioned something related to Disney-related things. So, and what I found was a little bit odd to me anyway, is that for those of you who lived in the UK, that for whatever reason, is that the actual TV series called Shaun the Sheep, which as a result, that series in mind was actually being added to Disney Plus, specifically the UK or the European countries, which I'm like, okay, that's a bit odd, especially considering for the fact that ever since in, you know, the past couple of years back, that for whatever reason that Disney Plus did somehow manage to able to release Chicken Run back then, but eventually that particular film got delisted, all because of after that particular realization about the fact that Chicken Run was being made by DreamWorks. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that, yeah, it's a bit of an odd situation back then. So, speaking of which though, it's about the fact I did manage to able to find out there's going to be even more updates for the sake of the forms of the highest grossing films of 2025. So, and as a matter of fact though, it's about the fact that we actually got some, well, interesting numbers in terms of the forms of some films so far. And that's what it appears to be for the fact that, well, number 1 still goes to Nizia 2, which, as a matter of fact, that particular film is still on to $2 billion for its box office, or more specifically, $2,164 million for its box office or something like that. So relatively speaking, I'm still genuinely surprised about the fact that that particular film is still ongoing in terms of the box office records. And second place it still goes to a Minecraft movie, which at this rate, that particular film is now on to $941 million for its box office, so it's almost getting very close to $1 billion. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that we still have no idea what the final numbers was going to be like, but we'll find out more about it probably at some point in later on throughout the majority of 2025. So anyway, and third place still goes to Detective Chinatown 1900, or specifically 1900. And generally speaking, though, that film is now on to $502 million for its box office. And on fourth place is actually kind of surprising, and that's what appears to be Lilo and Stitch remake. And as a matter of fact, that film is currently now on to $469 million for its box office. I'm guessing it's most likely because of merchandising, or perhaps in general about the fact that with Stitch himself. I'm guessing that'll be the case. I mean, mind you though, I still find that film to be okay, but not the best, but it does its job, unlike the films of how it does it for how laughable Snow White is, which I'll get to that later. So either way, fifth place now goes to Captain America Brave New World, which that particular box office numbers is basically unchanged, which as a matter of fact is still on to, you know, roughly $415 million for its box office, which generally speaking of, because that film was recently been added to Disney Plus ever since like almost a week ago. So generally speaking, it's about the fact that what I've noticed is about the fact that that film is doing okay to me anyway. So, and number 6 or 6th place in general goes to Thunderbolts, which is currently doing pretty decently, which as a matter of fact is currently now on to $361 million for its box office. And on the subject for that matter, 7th place goes to Sinners, which as a matter of fact is now on to $345 million for its box office. And well, generally though, is about the fact that on 8th place is, surprisingly enough, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, and so far that film is now on to $240 million for its box office, so it's doing decently well, but I don't know exactly for sure about the films of the final set of numbers, for the sake of the films of the box office demands, so we shall wait and see what happens in due time. And 9th place goes to Final Destination Bloodlines, which so far for that film is now on to $213 million for its box office. And 10th place is laughably Snow White, which generally speaking of is still stuck on the films of $205 million for its box office. And gee, that film is incredibly flopped. So not only in terms of box office, but in addition to, well, reviews alike. So yeah, it is generally very laughable to say the least. So anyway, speaking of which though, in regards to the films of upcoming remakes for certain films as a matter of fact, well, generally speaking, I was about the fact that for those of you who live in the UK, well, How to Train Your Dragon live action remake is going to be about a week left until the actual film is releasing on the big screen. At least, again, if you lived in the UK, that is. So, I'm not entirely sure if I was going to check that film out, per se, because, well, I was able to wait on that for a while until the actual reviews is going to turn up. So, either way, and it's also reassuring about this too, is about the fact that recently, though, I've managed able to find out something that's pretty interesting to say the least, and that's what it appears to be for the fact that, well, remember the films that Ian Flynn, that he usually did the writing of the films of the most recent Sonic games at the time? Specifically, not only the rewriting dialogue from Sonic Generations, the most recent remaster at the time, but also with the majority of Shadow Generations as a matter of fact. Well, someone did somehow say that they somehow discovered about the fact that apparently that not only does Ian Flynn is a Sonic fan, but he was also a brony as well. as he wrote the MLP/Transformers crossover comics, which is pretty interesting. And in addition to the Feast of Friendship is also a part of this, especially considering for the fact that both media, when it comes to likely not only for Sonic comics, but in addition to My Little Pony comics and stuff as well, for the likes of not only for the My Little Pony, but also with Transformers crossover, in addition to My Little Pony Feast Your Friendship series, which generally speaking is about the fact that it's kind of interesting, all things considered. And in addition to that though, there's also at the forms of that consideration of that Sonic Prime is using the My Little Pony voice actors. It's the closest Sonic slash My Little Pony crossover we can able to actually get. I mean, generally speaking though, because of all that familiar actors that I've somehow pretty much recognized during the films in some aspects, in terms of the films of Sonic Prime. So anyway, also another thing I'd like to point out is about the fact that apparently though, that when it comes to likely for specifically Nintendo Switch 2, they recently added in some other options such as, well, to be more accurate though, in controllers and accessories option on the system settings. So for instance though, is about the fact that they now shown us update your Nintendo Switch 2 camera, and in addition to test USB camera. So just to ensure for the fact that there aren't any technical issues here and there, so that'll be pretty useful if your camera decides to act out quite odd or strangely. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that the very least that's something. So anyway, yeah, because as a matter of fact for this point guys, that's as far as we can able to actually talk about. Oh yeah, I suppose there's technically the final thing I want to mention about before we're able to actually dive right into the forms of some extra stages. Enjoying the forms of in this particular world in general, not what appears to be for the fact that, well, unexpectedly, they may look like we're about to be receiving, let's just say a jukebox basically, when it comes to more accurately, for the sake of the forms of Mario Kart World, which, as a matter of fact, gee, no wonder why that game is going to be releasing in a year where the 40th anniversary of the Super Mario Bros. Franchise is going to take place or something like that. So, yeah, because as far as I'm aware, according to the forms of the actual description for it, it did say on the actual Mario Wikipedia, and it did state this. Mario Kart World is confirmed to have over 200 nearly arranged music tracks that can be listened to in a open world or during routes in Grand Prix or Knockout Tour, and are a part of what appears to be called the Jukebox. They consist of arrangements not only from the past Mario Kart entries, but also the Super Mario franchise as a whole. So, for instance though, we're about to be expecting to able to actually going to be having several music tracks from not only the majority of the Mario Kart games, like Super Mario Kart all the way up to, presumably, Mario Kart Live Home Circuit, and in addition to that, with any other main Mario titles, from likely from 2D Mario games to 3D Mario games, which is pretty cool and awesome at the same time, because generally speaking, like I said before, it could be something more related to the forms of the 40th anniversary of the Super Mario Bros. Franchise, as far as I do know of. Well, despite the fact that we still have no idea that what several surprises that all brings us to, in regards to the forms of getting hyped about the forms of the Super Mario Bros. 40th anniversary celebration. So either way, I suppose time will definitely tell though, enjoying at some point in specifically the next 3 months time, because as you probably already expect, that we now on to the final stretch of the first half of 2025. So I'm really still hoping about the fact that when it comes to the second half, in terms of 2025 anyway, will be a lot more steadier than the forms of how it does on the first half of 2025, because again, to me though, the first half of 2025 has just been all over the place, as you probably already expect, with the lack of uploading schedules, and in addition to our commentary is a little bit slightly awkward sometimes in some scenarios, but regardless of such though, it's about the fact that it still goes pretty dang well so far, especially considering for the fact with all the, you know, the followers or subscribers for that matter, it still keeps on going. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that we've almost at the, well, let's just say 1,100 subscribers as a matter of fact. I mean, generally speaking, I was about the fact that, well, again, I'd like to thank you all for able to actually supporting this channel so far, especially considering of how the fact that, you know, everything else goes all, like, pretty smoothly, apart from a few scenarios here and there, so... But anyway, let's hit on to the rematch against with the forms of Giant Chemic, and as you can tell, this will be the last time we can able to try to unlock new stages, because as soon as we're able to try to have a rematch against with the forms of not only Angry Hammer Bro, but in addition to Bowser twice, well, obviously though, there's no any rewards you can get. Well, apart from the fact that, well, again, it's probably best if we save that particular discussion during at some point by the end of this week. So, either way, it's time to take on Giant Chemic for the final time and do the usual stuff as before. Either jump onto him or just essentially just use parry right there to attack his face. So, because again, sometimes though about the fact you have to be super duper quick about it if he decides to able to go into the actual transition, for able to actually just to go into the actual, like, different spots of the arena, so... But, yeah, that's as far as we can able to discuss upon for this point, guys. I mean, I would have liked able to explain something else for that matter, though, but let's face it, though, it's about the fact that this is the moment of truth in regards to the forms of getting hyped about the forms of, you know, Nintendo Switch 2, and truth be told, though, is about the fact I've noticed about the fact that someone out there did somehow warn anyone else about with the forms of the game key card physical releases, then that's what it appears to be for the fact that you do not put the actual strong magnets right onto the forms of that particular... Well, it's hard for me to explain about this particular subject though, really, because as a matter of fact, that like I said before, that we only got 3 days left until, you know, Nintendo Switch 2 is releasing, so either way. So as you can tell, we somehow beaten Giant Chemic really dang quickly, so... And there we go, the final extra stages is now being accessible in World 8. So either way, hopefully though we can able to actually try to focus on those just before we're able to actually have a rematch against with the forms of the final boss again, which, truth be told, that's gonna happen. So either way, onwards to the extra stages now in World 7, and this is where the point where the fact that the extra stages becomes a little bit difficult. So, to be more specifically when it comes to likely doing a lot of level gimmicks, or potentially for that matter with all that tight platforming here and there. I mean, sometimes though it's about the fact that concentration is key here, especially considering about the fact that again, if you do die at one point, you have to restart the entire stage all over again. So, and I'm not entirely sure if your collectibles will be kept if you do get a game over. I mean, generally speaking, I haven't really tested out for myself, but that's just mainly because at this point in time, I'm pretty much used to with like, you know, concentration and all that stuff. So either way, because chances are though we can able to expect to realize that now, you know, we're now approaching towards the final stretch of this particular game. So as a result though, it's about the fact at this point in time that essentially speaking, it's about the fact that we can able to actually conclude the only 2 Princess Peach games they somehow released during that time, for the sake of the forms of Nintendo anyway. I mean, I already know there's gonna be some fan-made games out there, but I don't classify for counting those, because as far as you know, Nintendo official releases for Princess Peach games, well, straight to the point that we are basically almost done with Princess Peach's games in general. So, and then as a matter of fact, I was about the fact that that could be also applied with Donkey Kong games just before, you know, Donkey Kong Bonanza is going to be on its way for Nintendo Switch 2. And in terms of the forms of Wario games, I believe that we've only got about, you know, we still only got one platformer game left, which appears to be Wario Land The Shake Dimension, as you probably already expect. Now, when it comes to likely for WarioWare series of titles, well, there's actually like a couple of them, which appears to be WarioWare Snapped for the DSiWare, and in addition to Game & Wario, which I'm not a big fan of, and in addition to WarioWare DIY, not only for the DS, but also on the WiiWare as well, so we might consider trying to think about trying to do those games at some point. So either way, so that pretty much does it for World 7-7, so it's surprisingly kind of easy, despite with the this auto-scrolling section here and there. So as you can tell that, yes, we're about to be unlocking level 9 now, in terms of the forms of not only for Toad's Jump, alongside with Toad's Trot and Toad Shot as well. Because like I said earlier, we're about to be getting level 10 variants of some mini-games until the next world, or specifically, the final world. So, yeah, you get the idea what I was expecting for able to point things out. So, oh jeez, I'm having bad luck right there, especially because, again, this is where the game starts to get a little bit challenging in regards to the forms of what platforming is involved. So, but I do know for certain there's actually one little thing I was being on about in regards to the forms of that particular starfish enemy, ever since enjoying the forms of on Friday. Now, as a matter of fact though, is about the fact that we are technically missing a couple of those enemies enjoying the forms of our enemy book so far, which I know for a fact that it might be something to do with the forms of not knowing what to do at first glance. I mean, generally speaking though, because like I said before, it's been about 3 days ago since I actually have last played this for sure, so either way. Although thankfully though, if you accidentally fall off the bottomless pit while you do manage to able to activate the switch at first glance, then thankfully though, the actual progress has been saved, so you don't have to necessarily try to worry about backtracking a whole lot. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that at the very least the actual game has been super generous enough in regards to the forms of trying to able to save our progress if you accidentally fall off to the bottomless pit or something like that. So, oh jeez, we're going back into this infamous wind gimmick again ever since enduring the forms have been the 6th world. So even though I only fell to that particular pit for about 2 times so far, so because again, the difficulty is about to ramp up a little bit more, so just in case about the fact that again, there aren't any lives or anything, so it's just only in a matter of time about the fact you have to go for a lot of endurance platforming here and there, and in addition to tricky situations sometimes, so. But yeah, like I said before, there's nothing else I can really say about the forms of other than the fact that, well, I've already mentioned about the forms of this updated, box office record so far for 2025, and in addition to that, like I said earlier, that not long now until, you know, Nintendo Switch 2 is releasing, in addition to the Summer Game Fest is coming up soon as well, so we can able to actually mention about the forms of a lot of topics we'd like to point things out in terms of the forms of the next couple of days up ahead, especially noticeable about the fact that if Lola Bunny decides able to actually go back on playing through Pony Cards DS at some point in this coming weekend, and generally speaking, like I said before, that Maxie will definitely going to be coming back on playing through Paper Mario to do the last few bits before he decides able to finish that game off once and for all before we move on to the next couple of Let's Plays in the second half in 2025. So, oh yes, we got able to avoid those little chain chomps coming from the skies above and do some very tricky platforming, including with this very small platform right there. But thankfully though, we did manage to able to accomplish that on the first attempt, so not too shabby. And oh nice, we got ourselves a glorious start, although as a matter of fact though, getting a lot of coins might be felt a bit unnecessary for this point right now, because, you know, as to be expected, we've pretty much got every single items in the game, apart from one, which generally speaking I was about the fact that in terms of shop anyway, that obviously though there's technically one more item we do need to get during at some point once we completely done everything, not only in terms of the forms of those stages, but in addition to mini games and puzzle sections as well. So either way though, that, well, depending on how well we did, well, so far anyway, we're actually doing quite well so far. I mean, despite the fact that sometimes though about the forms of hesitation decides to come into play sometimes, well, either way, you get the idea what I was expecting for this point, so. Oh jeez, that was close. I almost could have fell into the bottomless pit down there, but regardless of such though, thankfully with the fast reaction timing when it comes to touchscreen and stuff like that, then we can able to make our way safe and sound into the actual next section with the forms of the slide Brilla. So, in fact, as a matter of fact, that we're actually getting pretty close towards the end of the majority of those slide Brilla sections, because, well, generally speaking, like I said before, that we are getting very, very, very close towards the end right now. Oh, you kidding me? There's more wind! Ah, jeez, why the wind has to be a thing. Especially considering for the fact that, again, if I mess up, like, a couple of times, then obviously, though, it'll just be a massive, massive time waster. So, oh jeez, that was a close one. and there's a mini game right there, which suffice to say that's definitely level 9, Toad Shot. But in order to be able to get that though, we need to activate that particular wind switch to the opposite direction, and we'll have to able to let the wind manage to able to actually get our momentum to the left. Although sliding will not work because, as you can tell, we couldn't move anywhere, so we have to let the wind decide to able to make a comeback and crouch for a bit, and that way you should be able to get yourselves level 9 in Toad Shot. So yeah, everything goes all pretty fine and dandy when it comes to likely for its, you know, getting everything else in the process. So, and we just need to touch the goal, and there we go, despite the fact that we're only going to take 1 pity coin, but that's okay, because coins doesn't mean anything anymore, because, you know, we've already purchased everything in the shops, basically, apart from 1 item, so either way, World 7 is completely done now. So because of that, yeah, you can see there's Luigi icon, just to ensure for the fact that we did indeed rescue him. So anyways, with all that being said, folks, it's never get ending stuff at this point right here. So join me next time for some more of Let's Play of Super Princess Peach for the Nintendo DS. Is that we are about to be hitting back into Bowser's Villa for the final time to grab the last couple of those puzzle pieces, score music in general, and more levels for the minigames. So I'll see you guys until tomorrow. Later, fellas.